meters away, you would come to New Zealand. Our country consists of two large main islands, called the North Island and the South Island, with a handful of other small ones scattered around them. It's about 1,400 kilometers long and about 300 kilometers across. It sits in splendid isolation in the South Pacific Ocean, for our nearest neighbor, Australia, is over 2,000 kilometers away. Christchurch International Airport, New Zealand, the 27th of September, 1974. For the first time ever, the ruler of Iran has come to New Zealand. His Imperial Majesty Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Shah of Iran, and Her Imperial Majesty the Shah Farah Pahlavi are visitors to New Zealand for 4 days. The royal party is greeted by His Excellency the Governor-General Sir Dennis Blundell and Lady Blundell. New Zealand is a member of the Commonwealth, and Sir Dennis represents Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, Queen of New Zealand. A 21-gun salute. The flypast is by jet planes of the Royal New Zealand Air Force. His Imperial Majesty inspects the Guard of Honour drawn from the Royal New Zealand Army. New Zealand has small but efficient armed forces and maintains air and ground forces in Southeast Asia. After greeting local dignitaries, the royal party is formally welcomed to New Zealand by the Governor-General.
We do hope that you enjoy your stay in New Zealand from our point of view, which is all too short. And may you find your few days in our country a happy experience.
We want to thank you on behalf of the Empress and myself for your warm words of greetings. We extend a warm hand of friendship towards all that would like to seize it.
By now, the weather is clearing, and the royal party drives from the airport towards the city of Christchurch. Christchurch has a population of 300,000. It was founded on the coastal plains of the province of Canterbury 125 years ago. The greatest numbers of immigrants to New Zealand at this time were British. The whole country still shows a large amount of British influence on its way of life. There is no state religion, but most of the people profess to be Christians. New Zealand's population numbers 3 million, less than 10% of Iran's. Predominantly young, 60% of the population are under the age of 30. Also, 60% of the people live in the cities and towns. Everyone who is 20 years old or over is entitled to vote. Indeed, New Zealand was the first country to give women the vote, more than 80 years ago. Before the Europeans arrived, New Zealand was inhabited by the Maori people. Modern New Zealanders are proud of their country's freedom from racial prejudice and of the equality of all, regardless of race, colour or creed. There is a high proportion of intermarriage between European and Maori, but those of Maori descent still dress and perform in a unique way to honour special guests and special occasions. This ceremonial dancing and chanting is based on centuries-old tradition. Before the arrival of the first Maoris less than 1,000 years ago, New Zealand was completely uninhabited and indeed undiscovered by anyone. So compared with Iran's thousands of years old civilization, New Zealand is still a relatively young country. Later that evening, the royal party attends the Christchurch Town Hall for a concert presented by the National Symphony Orchestra. The concert will be broadcast and televised, for all New Zealand homes have radios and most have television sets. The conductor is Hein Jordans, and the main work on the program is the Tchaikovsky B-flat minor piano concerto, in which the soloist is the internationally known gifted young New Zealand pianist Michael Houston. Next morning, the royal visitors see various breeds of sheep reared by scientists at Lincoln Agricultural College. Their Imperial Majesties see also how research has put better grass in the fields and better beef on the cattle that eat it. Studies are being made into the use of irrigation to provide better yields of lucerne. From Christchurch, the royal party flies across the richly fertile plains of the province of Canterbury towards the western coast of the South Island. New Zealand has been called the world's largest farm. Of a total area of 260,000 square kilometres, about 1/6 the size of Iran, slightly more than half is farmland. Leaving the plains, the royal visitors approach the Southern Alps, a mountain chain which runs the whole length of the South Island, a backbone 700 kilometres long, covering an area of 60,000 square kilometres. Many of the individual peaks in these Alps are well over 3,000 metres high. The aeroplane carrying the royal party is now entering Fjordland, a vast area of deep valleys, high mountains and numerous lakes and fjords. Until recently, some of this area had been barely explored. Now tourist planes fly in and out daily, so that visitors can savour the majestic grandeur of this alpine region for themselves. To Peak, at the head of Milford Sound. With the Prime Minister of New Zealand, the Right Honourable W.E. Rowling, the royal party is to make a launch trip down the Sound. Arno, the royal visitors pause on the way out of Fiordland to view the surrounding countryside. Nearly 500,000 tourists come from overseas every year just to look at New Zealand's wide variety of scenery. Not all New Zealand's farmland is flat, richly fertile, and knee-deep in lush, succulent grass. On marginal land, special methods have been developed for treating difficult situations, especially steep, inaccessible hillsides and mountain slopes. Aerial top dressing, it's called, and every year 1 million tons of fertilizer and 27.5 million litres of spray are sprayed on 3 million hectares of farmland. The Prime Minister, Mr. Rowling, explains the principles involved. This aeroplane, especially developed and manufactured in New Zealand for this work, is highly maneuverable and capable of carrying over a ton of fertilizer or lime in its hopper. Top dressing planes operate from short runways, about 100 meters long, formed on any convenient stretch of land on the farmer's property. The whole operation of loading, flying, dropping, landing and reloading takes only about 7 minutes. Continuing the journey, the royal party makes a tour by car of the rich farmlands to the south. This spring has been a particularly good season for the sheep. In the fields of Southland alone, there are 8 million new lambs. New Zealand has a total of almost 60 million sheep, and that represents a ratio of about 20 sheep to each person. Each year, this country produces nearly 40 million lambs, most of which are killed for export to countries all over the world. In fact, New Zealand is the world's largest exporter of sheep meat and dairy products. A century of concentrated scientific research, applied technology, and hard work has made New Zealand one of the world's top handful of the most efficient and successful farming countries. The cars pass through several small country towns where the local people greet their royal visitors with enthusiasm, the children excitedly waving Iranian flags. Farms are ankle deep in rich pasture, for the rainfall has been abundant, and now that it's spring, the amount of sunshine each day is gradually increasing. Being in the southern hemisphere, New Zealand's seasons are the opposite of those in Iran. Also, our country does not have great extremes of weather, the climate being much the same as Italy's, for example, so that farm animals may stay out in the open all year round. At the historic and gracious old homestead at Mount Linton, a large sheep farm, Their Imperial Majesties are the guests of the New Zealand Meat Board at an informal luncheon. This is the last function in the South Island to be attended by the royal visitors. For now, they're to fly directly to Wellington in the North Island, a flight of about 2 hours. The whole 700-kilometre-long eastern coast of the South Island constitutes a large, very fertile agricultural area. The North Island, and just ahead, the city of Wellington. Wellington International Airport. The Shah and Shah Banu are greeted once again by the Governor-General. Sir Dennis and Lady Blundell also welcome the Prime Minister, Mr. Rowling, and Mrs. Rowling back to Wellington. Their Imperial Majesties are greeted also by a special party of children of Polish descent, dressed up for the occasion. Though it's late in the evening, the parties waited patiently as a mark of respect to give thanks to the Shah for the way in which Iran provided shelter and assistance for Polish refugees during the Second World War. The capital city of New Zealand, Wellington, has a population of 340,000. Lying on the southernmost coast of the North Island, only 20 kilometres from the South Island, it occupies an almost central position in New Zealand as a whole. On their first morning in the city, their Imperial Majesties visit the town hall for the civic welcome. Civic officials are introduced to Her Imperial Majesty. The signing of the visitors' book. Accompanied by the Prime Minister's wife, Mrs. Rowling, Her Imperial Majesty pays a visit to Wellington Girls' College. Though there are some private schools, the state educational system is free, secular, and compulsory. Most are co-educational, but in all of them the children must attend school between the ages of 5 and 15, though any who live in remote country areas receive their education by means of mail and radio broadcasts through the National Correspondence School. Many of these children will go on to university. There are 6 in New Zealand, and anyone who's old enough or passes the entrance examinations is entitled to study for a degree. In many schools, the pupils wear a distinctive school uniform. Next, Her Imperial Majesty visits the dental clinic, where school dental nurses are trained. These girls will work in schools, carrying out simple dental repairs and instructing young children in oral hygiene. In New Zealand, all dental and medical care for children is free until they leave school. New Zealand was one of the first countries to recognize the need for social welfare and security. After the worldwide depression of the early 1930s, successive governments enacted legislation to ensure that this country should enjoy as high a standard of social well-being as possible. New Zealanders have had their welfare state now for 45 years. A government luncheon in honour of their Imperial Majesties. The Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Mr. Rowling.
Your Excellencies, Your Imperial Majesties, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honour and a very special pleasure for me to welcome Your Imperial Majesties to New Zealand. I know that that feeling is shared by my colleagues in government and in Parliament, by the very many people who have had the pleasure of meeting Your Majesties during the last few days, and indeed by people throughout New Zealand. Firstly, this morning, Your Majesty's Foreign Minister, Mr. Khaled Bari, and I have signed a trade agreement between our two countries. The agreement contains a number of provisions, but I would mention in particular the establishment of a Joint Commission for Trade and Economic Development, which will meet each year alternately in Tehran and Wellington. My second announcement concerns diplomatic relations. We were most pleased when Ambassador Esragi, Your Majesty's ambassador to Australia, was accredited to New Zealand earlier this year. To complement this arrangement, and in recognition of the deep value we see in strengthening relations between our two countries, the New Zealand government has decided to establish an embassy in Tehran, and we expect to have a resident ambassador there in the early months of next year.
His Imperial Majesty, the Shah of Iran.
I don't think that you should be worried about producing too much lamb. This can very well be consumed by the rest of the world. So it is with complete confidence in this country and your future that I would like to wish you all success in all your endeavors for the benefit of the present generation and all those to come. Thank you.
The Shah comments further on the prospects for trade and cultural exchanges between Iran and New Zealand at a later news conference.
Again, I repeat, it will entirely depend on the wishes of New Zealand, but most probably in developing new resources which would be beneficial to both sides, which will eventually be exported towards my country or towards third countries. Could take major proportions and on the increase, because our population is augmenting, and at the same time their purchasing power is augmenting. Obviously they are going to eat more and more meat, and we are especially lamb or mutton eaters.
That evening, a state reception for their Imperial Majesties. Majesty's last evening in New Zealand. For the next morning, they're to leave Wellington to fly further north to Auckland, where they're to board their own plane for the flight to Indonesia. His Imperial Majesty inspects the Guard of Honour drawn from the Royal New Zealand Air Force. It is an hour-long flight to Auckland, and it gives Her Majesty a chance to make a few notes about the trip. Unlike the South Island, the North Island has no large chains of mountains. Indeed, there are only 4 high peaks in its whole area. But within its 115,000 square kilometers, it does have extensive regions of steep ranges and high hill country, as well as many lush, fertile plains. Extensive sheep, beef and dairy farming is carried out on all types of country. Auckland. And so their Imperial Majesties, the Shah and Shah Aramir and the Shah Banu of Iran, end their visit to New Zealand. They've been here only 4 days, but in that time they've won the respect and affection of all who have met them. As they go, they take with them from the people of New Zealand their best wishes for the future of both the royal family and the Iranian people.